Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Granite Mountain Movie Club. We're not covering a specific movie today. We are going to be talking about a bunch of movies. Before I describe what we're doing, I'll just introduce who's here. We've got George Dahl back, I think just the second time. I had George on like 2 years ago, probably. Been meaning to get him back. George, how you doing?
Good, man. Yeah, for the Zodiac show. That was a lot of fun. We had Bandy on for that. That was a cool show.
Yes. And then we've got Bandy. Bandy is back. I had him on a couple months ago. How are you doing, Bandy?
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, a bunch of people were really complimentary about your appearance on the proposition that we talked about.
That's cool. Thank you.
And then multi-time guest, frequent guest, Degree Studies is here. How are you doing, Degree Studies?
Good. I'm good. Good to be with you as always.
I see that the Celtics have avoided elimination.
Yeah, Luke Cornett, the GOAT, had a near triple-double with blocks. Hail Cornett, hail our people. Victory.
He only had like 9 blocks?
Yeah, he had 8 or 9.
Wow. Okay, so yes, we're recording this on the night of the game, 6 of the...
Sadly, this was game 5.
Game 5, yeah.
So
I'm thinking they still lose the series, but good for them. Okay, so a few weeks ago, friend of the show, Lomez, was over on a New York Times podcast with Ross Douthat. I think that's how you say it, Ross's name. And Ross asked him a question, which was something like, if you were going to show a movie to high schoolers, and someone can correct me if I get this wrong, but here's how I remember it. He's like, if you're going to show a movie to high schoolers, I guess for the purpose of like endearing them to the American nation, like to the American, to America, like what might you show them? And I think he asked him as well, like what one movie and one book. And I thought that was a really good question. I think Lomez's answer for that episode when he was talking to Ross was No Country for Old Men, which we covered on this show. But I thought, that's a really good question. We could explore that further. So I've got like a panel of guys here who they're all, I'd say you're all patriots. You guys all love America. Is anyone not?
No, it's great.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. I just wanted to make sure everyone here is a patriot. Everyone here is, I think, trusting the plan. And I thought, okay, well, I could bring these guys on and let's have them make a list of, each of them has brought with them 5 titles for films that you might show a high school class, a high school junior or senior, to help them better understand the American experience and to better, to want to be better Americans and to become plan trusters themselves, perhaps. How did you guys find this exercise?
I really enjoyed it. It kind of stretched my thinking because I hope I came at it in the right way that you're looking for, Granite, but I suppose we'll get to that when we get to my list and I offer my explanations.
Yeah, I thought your list was really interesting, which we'll get into. And I think I gave very little instructions because I was sort of haphazardly putting this together.
It was a hard exercise because I realized a lot of my favorite movies are kind of nihilistic. Like No Country for Old Men, I wouldn't say necessarily is going to red pill the youth on America.
Yeah, which I don't know if that, like in Lomez's case, I don't know exactly. Maybe I'm misremembering exactly Ross's question, but yeah, I agree. I mean, like, what might they take away from that? I'm not sure.
Like, is red pilling the goal?
Yeah, they might want to. It might red pill them on Mexico.
It's not necessarily red. Yeah, red pilling's not necessarily the goal, and I didn't really give a goal, so I think I'm gonna go with like endearing to America, like helping them better understand America, better feel a part of America, and want to continue contributing to the American project.
I will say this isn't your fault, and I mean this in a good way, but these kinds of exercises like drive me insane. Like, I'm one of those people who, if someone asks me my favorite book or my favorite band, I have a really hard time, and I ask like a lot of clarifying questions. And I know that you kind of wanted us to create our own system for how we thought this should go, but I really struggled with Like initially, I think my idea was, okay, I want 5 movies that sort of would give someone like the breadth of different subcultures in America that I find attractive. Yeah, so basically, I just went back and forth through so many things. I mean, my first idea was to choose movies that captured different subcultures, especially subcultures that might be gone today, but would nevertheless be compelling to a young person. But I couldn't really think of 5 movies that were, good as films and also met that criteria. So then I sort of thought, well, should I do like different periods? Maybe like a post-war American movie, a Western, maybe something about the Revolutionary War. But I don't know. I went through all these different things, and ultimately, I couldn't settle on anything. But I noticed after the fact that I think in the movies I chose, they each have like a very cool male lead with a little bit sort of like off kilter charisma. And I do think that the movies I chose, the lead has like a distinctly American charisma. So I can talk about that more, but I think that's what I settled on. But it was a torturous process to go through all these iterations and think about
Yeah.
all the different things you could do.
And I think some people are going to have some issues with our list because so we've got 20 films here between the four of us, and it is not the list I anticipated. There's some stuff on here I did anticipate, but there's a lot that's missing, I think. Not missing, but is not what you'd expect. So I hope people get a little upset. I hope they say, how could you idiots leave off, whatever. And I hope I hope it generates more conversation. So let's jump into it. And we're going to go, I asked each of us to bring 5. Then we'll start with our number 5 and go down to our number 1. George, I'm going to have you go first, just because that's on this chart I made your number 1. And you had this movie that I have not seen, The Magnificent Ambersons. Can you tell us a little bit why you chose that?
Yeah, I can. And I'll follow up by kind of explaining my methodology for coming up with these movies to kind of follow in degree studies, like, how can I justify all of these films? And I guess I tried to put myself in the theoretical role of a teacher. And I really tried to not think of myself as a propagandist, but I think the goal, and I think that Lomas spoke to this in his interview with Douthit, is that what really makes a solid movie, it's not necessarily that it's right-wing based, red-pilled. It's going to make them uber patriots, right? Like a Mel Gibson patriot meme. It's going to be something that's going to like actually add to their life and help them to understand like the culture that they're living in and that they're entering as a graduate from like a high school, right? Now, I also took into account like entertainment value, but and I think my list will also have as much to say about the films that I didn't include as I did. So, The Magnificent Ambersons is Orson Welles' famous follow-up to Citizen Kane, a movie that's most famously considered one of the best movies ever made. And then also it gets a lot of hate for being like boring. People say that about it. People say The Godfather is boring. They say, they say Citizen Kane is boring. It's magnificent. But the Magnificent Ambersons is the film. It's a film about a family in Indiana. And it was based on a book written by a guy named Turkington, who was sort of right-wing coded in a way. So I guess I would consider him kind of like who's the guy that did Metropolitan? You know what I'm talking about? The director of Metropolitan. Like he was that for the 19th century. So he had a lot of nostalgic care and interest for the 19th century. And
Whit Stillman.
Whit Stillman. He's the Whit Stillman of like the 19th century. So he has a particular love for the upper class, but he also is not immune to pointing out their foibles and where they misstepped. So it's a film about a family that's become magnificently wealthy, and they're a staple of the Indianapolis community, but they fail to recognize the opportunity to invest in automobiles based on really their own sort of prejudice against the industrious lower class and the encroaching industrial revolution. So if I were to show this to a group of kids, it would be basically for them to understand. And I think my list mostly follows this path. This is a great country. and we're both indebted to our heritage, but it's also a country with a real amount of propulsion into the future. So it's like inherently schizophrenic.
Yeah, that's
And, you know, go ahead.
that's a really beautiful articulation. I should have said though that part of the premise here is that you're teaching at a public school in Baltimore. So I'm not sure how this is going to go down. You might get an interesting response from your students when you watch The Magnificent Ambersons from 1942.
Well, yeah, because the students in Baltimore might say, "Oh, these rich people, well, they got what they deserved," But Tarkington, like Whit Stillman, he loves these people that he's critiquing. It's sort of a parody of their foibles and their lifestyle, but at the same time, there's a sort of pining for this better, more elegant time. But at the same time, the major idea is you have to sort of get with the times, which I think is I think that's very inherently American.
I think it certainly is. It's kind of one of the, there's the big meme, about the American mind cannot comprehend, the European mind cannot comprehend. And that is one of the very American traits, is that we're religious, but we're not, what is it? We don't hold necessarily everything so sacred that we never change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, it got me thinking about the new Pope and his choice of name, which parallels the Leo in, I think it was 1840 was the last Leo. And he commented that he thought that he was the Pope for the second industrial revolution through AI, and was hoping to try to establish a through line there and to argue for the rights of people's labor and their dignity as human minds in a world where technological advancements continue on. And it got me thinking about this movie, which is spectacular. I mean, Orson Welles directed it. The studio took it away from him. They tore it apart. And actually, if you guys are Haywood fans, he actually talked about Booth Tarkington, the author, in one of his episodes of The Worthy House.
Oh, interesting.
And
That's where I've heard this before.
yeah.
Familiar.
He contrasts Tarkington with another Indiana native, Theodore Dreiser, who wrote the Montgomery Clift, Elizabeth Taylor movie, A Place in the Sun. And Dreiser was very much one of these guys who also wrote an American epic. And, The Magnificent Ambersons is such an epic. It's a multi-generational story about the decline of a great family in America. But in Dreiser's, formulation, America is just a big scam, and it's all about people trying to, crawl their way to the top by whatever means necessary. And, it's a dog eat dog terrible place. And that's not really Tarkington's formulation of the issue with the Amberson family. Their problem is a sort of a prejudice against change and technology and the lower classes. And I think the movie is sort of a call for unity and understanding and that zeal for Americans to thrust forward. So.
Well, you got me hyped on watching it. So I'm gonna jump over now to Bandy with your number 5. And I'm going to spoil the list a little bit for the listener, but this is the newest movie on the list of 20 movies. The newest movie, the most recent movie, is 2001, or the film Black Hawk Down from 2001.
Yeah, we're kind of going in reverse order here, in terms of what I thought was important, or what I would most heartily recommend to kids. And I thought it was important to have a war movie on the list. And it had to be something realistic, because I didn't want to sugarcoat things for kids, or somehow be like a recruiter for the military. But I also thought it had to reflect a certain reality that I see, and especially on Twitter right now, there's a lot of skepticism about America's role in the world. And I think that's very justified. I think we're overextended. We need to consolidate like Hadrian. I think Trump is kind of like that kind of figure. I think he's on the right path there. But that kind of skepticism about foreign intervention, it lapses into this anti-militarism or anti-U.S. military sentiment. And some of that's justified with like the woke stuff. But what I've noticed is veterans, they generally don't regret serving, even when they really hate the higher levels of leadership, or they see the war as misguided. And I think what's going on there is that people recognize that being in the military especially one of these elite units, like in Black Hawk Down, it's the the Ranger Regiment and the Delta Force. I think people realize those are still very high competence organizations, and they're an opportunity to bond with other men in a way that it's not possible in the civilian world outside of maybe like professional sports teams. Um, that same level of focus and brotherhood, you don't get it anywhere else. And I think Black Hawk Down is kind of an ideal example of what the good parts of the U.S. military are, and it's set in possibly one of the most pointless military engagements we've been in recent history. But the soldiers acquit themselves well, and it's also just a great movie. It's just one long, action shot basically, and so
Yeah.
I feel like it. I loved it as a high schooler, so figured it'd be an easy sell for especially the high school boys.
Yeah, great movie. Our list, I would say, is probably light on the military movies, so I'm glad you included that. And then I mentioned when you put this one down, I don't know if anyone else has seen Warfare, the new movie, but it reminded me of Black Hawk Down a bit, but it's pretty cool. I recommend that just as a new movie that if anyone hasn't seen it yet.
If I could chime in here too, Black Hawk Down is like part of the Ridley Scott renaissance of like the 1950s action epic that featured like a million actors who all were clamoring to be in it, to be in the next epic. I mean, this film has an excellent cast. And when I saw it when I was a young kid, it's an excellent recruiting tool for the military. I mean, it has something that modern military movies don't have, which is that there's very faint identification with the enemy. You know, we see a lot of these Middle Eastern movies, and there aren't a lot, to be fair, but you look at something like Three Kings, there's always that obligatory moment where the put upon, Middle Eastern person has to have his 2 cents about how, America bombed us a lot. So, we're
Yeah.
justified and
There's none of that
we,
in Black Hawk Down. They're the
none.
skinnies. That's it.
Exactly. And the most powerful part of the movie too is I think when the helicopter pilot is downed and he pulls his wallet out and looks at the picture of his loving wife back home in 1994 America, and he has to fend off a horde of just, a horde with the last bullets
A horde of
remaining,
Minnesotans.
And it's incredibly powerful, and I got incredibly jacked watching this film. And
Yeah, this came out when I was a teenager. It was a big deal.
Yeah, it was huge. I think I saw it when I was like 9 years old. Like my mom was very liberal with what we could watch as kids, which was, not in a bad way, because if she thought that something had artistic value, even if it was, full of nudity and art and murder and blood, it was okay for us to watch.
See, that's interesting because my dad was the same way, but if there was, a single boob in a movie, we couldn't watch it. But if, I think I watched Predator when I was 9. Jesse Ventura depopulating half of Mexico. That was okay. But a nipple is too much.
With that, let's move on to Degree Studies, your entry, Slapshot from 1977.
Yeah, I just want to say real quick, the no tolerance for nudity, but body count can be infinite. That's America rules. That's one of our
I think
big contrast with Europe. That's what made us great. That kind of attitude. But yeah, so
always had a post on that did really well.
Yeah, so my first movie was 1977's Slapshot. This is a hockey movie starring Paul Newman. At his most Paul Newman, like he's an incredibly charming and I guess sort of traditionally masculine character, but also with the specific flourishes that Paul Newman would bring to characters. And interestingly, for a movie about men and something as sort of like blood-soaked and working class as minor league hockey, it's written by this woman, Nancy Dowd, who is actually from a town in Massachusetts about 5 minutes away from where I grew up, and I spent a lot of time in this town. And it is a place where you might know people who played minor league hockey. When I was in high school, we had all the American sports, but the only sport we were good at was hockey. And there's a lot of places like that in Massachusetts. And Nancy Dowd, who wrote this movie, based it on the experiences of her brother, Ned Dowd, who was like a enforcer for a minor league hockey team for many years. And so the premise of the movie is that you're in a Pennsylvania steel town, and Paul Newman is the player coach of a minor league hockey team that because of the jobs from the mill going away, they're getting less and less crowds at their games. And so he decides that the way they're going to draw people in is by being the most violent team in the league. So they start signing players that aren't particularly good at the more skillful parts of hockey, but are good at fighting. And sort of the backdrop to this is that his ex-wife, who he's trying to get back together with, doesn't approve of violence. And the ending of this movie is incredible. I'm a little torn here because I would think some people listening haven't seen it, and I do not want to ruin it for those who haven't seen it. So maybe I won't talk about it, but I'll just say, like, what I love so much about this movie and what I think is maybe instructive. I mean, you can see this is like a classic American tale, right? There's a small town that's sort of it's going away. It's a dying town, and there's this wonderful little civic thing of a sports team that they're trying to see if they can salvage the community. But like nothing good really happens in the movie. It's just sort of about how men like, you know, maintain their dignity in the performance of something while their life, both personal and professional, is falling apart. And it's extremely funny. It's sort of like a sports comedy film, not necessarily in the same vein as like, you know, Will Ferrell sports comedies. Like it's not a joke a minute, but it's an extremely charming and funny movie. And I think the ending in particular is like very unexpected and incredible. So I think those are the things I would want the kids to take from it. One, this performance by Paul Newman as sort of just like a classic American tough guy, and then also, you know, the economic backdrop about the Midwest and, you know, hockey as sort of like a refuge from a sort of barren life and all that. So it's a really spectacular movie, and for anyone listening that hasn't seen it, I recommend it very highly.
And it's also got that it's got that image, you know, the guy with the thick frame glasses and the blood coming down his neck, which is
those are the Hanson brothers.
It's one of the most common profile pictures on Twitter. I've seen thousands of that profile picture.
Right, and I think the Andrew WK album, where he's making the exact same pose with long, sweaty hair and blood, I always assumed that was a Slapshot homage.
Well, at the risk of making this podcast run for 3 hours, I'll say one thing. This is a great choice, Degree Studies. This is a terrific movie. And also, the funniest joke in the film, in my opinion, is when the ref decides to use the national anthem as an opportunity to, sort of covertly chastise the Hanson brothers and say that he's going to run a clean game. And then the Hanson brothers are non-responsive. And when he keeps prodding at them, they say, "I'm listening to the fucking song." You know, the national anthem, which I think is a great way of demonstrating, hey, leave me alone with your rules. I'm celebrating America right now. Shut up.
Yeah, let's go.
All right, I'm going to move on to my pick, which is maybe one of you can actually pronounce this better than I can. I don't know how to pronounce it. There's a cool song where they say it, so maybe that can be my guide. But it's 1982, Koyanis Katsi. Now, for anyone who hasn't seen it, this is I guess you'd say experimental film. I mean, it's there's no narrative, there's no dialogue, I don't know if there's any narration at all. It's just scenes of America, mostly in the 1980s, I think, or 70s and 80s. Scenes of American life, set to a Philip Glass score. It's a really great score. And this term, Koyaanisqatsi, is from the Hopi tribe, meaning something like life out of balance. So I think it's subtly, I mean, it's supposed to be maybe a criticism a bit of American excess and probably capitalism or something. But and even though I, tend to be in favor of American excess, it's a really cool movie. It's a lot of fun. It's surprisingly fun for what I just described. A lot of it is the kind of hectic and at times like overwhelming score, but it's just great footage too. It's just really incredible, high quality footage all across, there's a lot of urban emphasis, but then there's also a lot of naturalist scenes. So I recommend people check that out if they haven't seen it.
I remember in your group chat, somebody shared Baraka, which I only watched about 20 minutes of, but it's a similar premise of like, but it's kind of focused on world cultures. There's no music. It's just like shots of like an Orthodox monk and people singing in Tibet and stuff. And I said I would like this kind of movie, but it was only Americans doing cool stuff like woodworking or riding horses and stuff. And so when you mentioned that this was one of those types of films, but set all in the United States, I was very intrigued.
Yeah. We can move on to the next row. George has a classic Western here, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance from 1962.
I'll just say something quick about Koyaanisqatsi, which is that I watched it under the recommendation of someone that was a film nerd when they were coming up in the 80s, and they talked about how wild that movie was. I mean, we are sort of inundated with footage from all over the world via social media, but at the time that was very new and exciting. And also, I think it plays into my theme a little bit about the sort of schizophrenia of American culture as well, which is that we want to preserve our great landscapes a la Teddy Roosevelt, but also we want to keep going. But The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance is my dad's favorite movie, which is interesting because, and I think it has extra precedence because my dad is not a movie fan by any extent, but it's a film that really appeals to him. And it's a John Ford movie. And I will say something controversial that might get us clicks, which is that often John Ford's films, they like people love The Searchers. And that's a film that I really don't like very much. I think that the reason it gets so much attention is because it's, well, John Wayne is sort of this gray area character, and maybe he's good and bad. And by the end, he realizes to, love Native Americans or something, or not be a violent, right-wing guy. And he sort of tables his more violent nature. But I think that film was sort of boring. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance is... it's very much a sort of master and commander style film about two men in a town who have diverging political viewpoints. John Wayne plays a character who is very much a salt of the earth cowboy, manly man who thinks that violence is the way. And Jimmy Stewart plays a lawyer who's new into the West, who wants to modernize it. He wants to bring law and order from the East. And it's about, as much as it's about their conflict, it's about how to deal with this rogue character of Liberty Valance, played by Lee Marvin, who is just a wanton criminal. And people talk a lot about the impact of something like The Dark Knight and what that has to say about our society, in which Batman feels it's better to preserve the lie that Harvey Dent is the man because he's the person that sort of he sort of embodies the law. And Man Who Shot Liberty Valance is very much the same way, in that ultimately Jimmy Stewart and Lee Marvin have to come into conflict. But Jimmy Stewart obviously cannot face him man to man in a handgun duel. So from the shadows, John Wayne shoots Liberty Valance and kills him. But the myth that goes forward is that Jimmy Stewart was the one who defeated him. So Jimmy Stewart is the one person that sort of carries the burden of this Socratic lie for the higher purpose of domesticating the West. And it's a very interesting film about how liberals who act in good faith are a good balancing point to a more rugged right-wing lifestyle or vision of the world. So it's a very good movie and one of the best Westerns that John Ford ever made.
I was just reading the Wikipedia entry on it, and it looks like this is one of his that wasn't filmed in Monument Valley. Is that right? It looks like it was filmed on.
It's filmed on like a TV set. Like
Yeah,
there's no
cutting costs
real landscape. It's all very dialogue driven. It's there's a great moment in the film too where there's a standoff between John Wayne and Liberty Valance where someone throws somebody's steak on the ground and demands that they pick it up. And it's kind of like this masculine, ego battle. And Jimmy Stewart comes in and picks it up off the floor and says, we have to stop this, sort of like egomania. And, it's a movie that I think you can walk away with your own opinion on who's right or who's most justified and who is the most logical person. It doesn't spoon feed it to you. It presents you presents you a situation, and you can draw your own conclusions.
That's a
And I
cool
think that,
pick. 'Cause- Go ahead.
you know,
Go ahead,
I
Dakota.
was just going to say, I really feel about old movies. I know, especially some younger folks think old movies are boring, but I think old movies did such a. I think this is just part of good storytelling, but there are so many older movies that are masterful about showing you different archetypes in American life that are in conflict, but within the text of the film, showing that they both have value and that sort of like it is the ecosystem that contains both of those opposed feelings that sort of like makes the unique and hopefully productive fabric of the country. So I haven't seen this movie since I was a very little kid when my dad made me watch westerns, but I'll check it out again because that kind of thing really appeals to me.
yeah, you got it exactly right.
I've learned from John Ford's movies are like this. They were a little subversive for their time. I've learned that from I don't know if you guys listen to Brendan Luceau's podcast, Tales from the Mall, but he knows a lot about John Ford. And I think it was actually an episode with Howling Mutant of all people. They were talking about how the Irish NCOs in Fort Apache kind of played up their humorous angle, and that was kind of like that was like almost a racial commentary back then, that these John Ford was Irish and that he was, calling out these Irish NCOs as like an underclass to the waspish officers. And, it was meant to kind of rile people up a little bit. So he was a progressive thinker in a way.
Well, Ford was an Irishman himself too, and also a fairly prolific drunk from the accounts. I mean, he had like this overbearing, really odd relationship with John Wayne, to where even in John Wayne's later years, when Peter Bogdanovich was doing his documentary on John Ford, he was bossing John Wayne around, and Wayne treated him kind of like a father figure. And there
That's
are
interesting.
anecdotes about him slapping Maureen O'Hara, and he was a very tough guy. But for one of Hollywood's like greatest, most heralded directors, he sort of didn't fit the bill exactly for what we think. He was a drunk, rowdy old Irishman, and he defined the West, I think, for the generation. I mean, to this day, I mean, he defined what the West was for many Americans post 1950 for the rest of the 20th century and beyond.
Let's jump to Bandy's next selection. And earlier I misspoke. I said that Black Hawk Down was our most recent entry. This next one is actually the most recent, from 2007, Into the Wild.
Yeah, this is might be a controversial one because every time this movie comes up, people talk about how much they hated the the kid who dies in this movie. And
Yeah.
I start. It's not without its faults, but where I started here was with the book Walden, which I read in high school, and like a lot of people, I thought it was really boring. I thought Henry David Thoreau was like a smug bastard and kind of preachy, but that's the type of book you read in high school, and you're a little too young to get it. Walden doesn't really start to make sense until you've had your first job, which can often suck, and you start to think about how to avoid having a job, and reducing your expenses and living in a cheap place as recommended in Walden is a reliable strategy to do that. And so I was kind of thinking like, is there a movie that's kind of Walden-esque? And I don't think there really. This was the closest I could get. Um, and it's a pretty movie. There's a lot of cool scenes of um, McCandless going across the American West, which I'm into. And I think his lifestyle, this is what might annoy people, but I think his vagabonding lifestyle, working in Burger King temporarily and dumpster diving to fund his van lifing basically, I think that's okay. I think America is a place where you can be a grinder, but you should also be able to be a Thoreau type figure and live in a cheap place, and don't expect a handout. But if you want to live cheaply, we got enough land that you should be able to do that. And I thought this was a good kind of example of it. It's obviously a cautionary tale because the kid, he's preachy like Thoreau was, and he can be kind of smug, and you don't want to be like that. And obviously, he was hopelessly unprepared for what he tried to do, and he died out there. So you don't want to be like him too much. You want to find a mentor and have the right equipment and survive your first winter. But all in all, I think people should be more like him, or especially when they're young and they don't have a lot of obligations, they should take more risks like that.
Yeah, and I want to say something about McCandless, which is I think the original article about him was called "Death of an Innocent,"
Hmm.
and I haven't read that in a long time. But the word innocence like stands out really strongly to me because there are really good things about innocence and naivete, but like competence is not one of them. So like I think it's weird in a way to like I know I even have an uncle who's sort of like a rough man, lives in Alaska and has a lot of outdoors competence, and he was saying like when this kid died, he was only like 3 miles from a ranger station. Like what was he doing? But it's like the whole point is like this kid. What's unique about him is like he couldn't make a compromise with society as it was structured. And so like one consequence of that is that he's not going to engage with knowledge or institutions the way like a practical or competent person would. But like the good things about him, like his willingness to do that, his willingness to go it alone and just explore, and like even as a naive person have a totally improvised adventure, like his faults and his good qualities both flow from that naivete or that innocence. And so yeah, I was always rubbed the wrong way by people being like, this kid is dumb, because it's like, no one does this. Like it's it's sad for his family, and he obviously paid the ultimate price. But like what we're seeing in him, what we're admiring, there are qualities besides competence that are worth admiring.
The book that this is based on compares him to Everett Roos, who was a kind of similar naive adventurer in the 1930s, who also possibly he disappeared in the canyon lands of Utah, probably died. Um, but he's another one of those figures.
Yeah, so now we have Lord Miles. Um, yeah, I like Into the Wild, and maybe it's not cool to say, but I like the Eddie Vedder soundtrack too.
I like that too.
Degree Studies. Let's go to your next pick. One of my favorite movies of all time, from 1996, Independence Day.
Yeah, so everybody I'm sure is familiar with this movie, so I think I can skip the plot and just talk about sort of why I feel this is a relevant movie in terms of Americana and what's endearing about America. I think in my own life, I think of this movie as coming out at a time when America was flying high, like had a lot of confidence in itself. And Will Smith, in some ways, it's funny. I think there is sort of like a civilizational trajectory of America and Will Smith that seem to be oddly paired. It's like in 1996, coming off years of Fresh Prince, he's like the biggest star in the world. Every white teenager thinks he's the coolest guy that's ever lived, and now he's like sort of a sad old man who has outbursts and appears to not even like really be with his wife. So yeah, take the metaphor to America however you want. But this was a movie about like American confidence, and I think a lot of the characters in the movie, Bill Pullman, Jeff Goldblum, Will Smith, they all capture like different facets of American confidence and American capability. And I think another thing that's really interesting about this movie is, one thing I connect with in America, even though I'm Catholic, is there is this great and culturally rich vein of like America as the country that will save the world, and that sort of being linked to certain ideas in American Protestantism. And so I think there's a bunch of great movies, but Independence Day is probably the best one, where America is cast as sort of the organizer or the chief party in some conflict where humanity has to band together. And I think like part of saying this movie came out when America was at the height of its confidence is just it makes sense narratively as an American in the 90s to sort of say like, oh yeah, if there was a worldwide natural disaster, if there was a zombie apocalypse, if there was a war against aliens, like America would lead the way, probably figure out how to kill the aliens first, and translate that knowledge to all these other countries. Because and there is like some multicultural stuff in it. Like it's almost like I think the movie does present that in some ways America has these unique competencies because everyone is here, the Jeff Goldblum character, his father is sort of like an observant Jew who makes some Jewish jokes throughout the movie, and Goldblum is definitely like the mercurial Jewish scientist who figures everything out.
Kind of a
Um,
Manhattan Project proxy.
yeah, exactly. And so it's capturing like these nodes of American culture and how we thought of them as in the 90s as sources of strength, and then that knowledge is disseminated to all. There's a funny scene where like they're, I think by Morse code, because the aliens have taken out like normal communications channels, they're telling all the different countries how to take down the alien ships. And so you see like these little stereotypical scenes of like French guys in the striped shirts receiving the information, and then like Zulu warriors receiving the information, and every country but America is very like one note. They sort of show like a base ethnic stereotype, but of course the team we've assembled in America to fight the aliens has all different sorts of people. And there's even like some interesting class stuff going on. Like Will Smith's girlfriend is a stripper, and then I think the first guy to actually take down the ship is Randy Quaid.
Yes,
He's sort of
yeah.
like a like
Survivalist.
supposed to be a trailer park guy, but does he have Native American kids? Am I remembering that
His,
right?
Yeah.
his son is like brown. Yeah.
He's
Yeah,
like
so
a-
it's
He's a conspiracy theorist.
yes.
Very
Randy
Twitter
Quaid
coded.
seemingly playing some version of his future self. But yeah, it does a great job. It's Roland Emmerich directed, and it does a great job, I think, of telling this awesome story where they show how sort of these different characters from different parts of America contribute to this global project of,
Yeah, it's
of taking out the aliens.
you've got Jewish intelligence, and you've got Anglo leadership in Bill Pullman, and then you've got, what is it, like Scott's Irish recklessness with Randy
Yeah,
Quaid,
Scotch
and
Irish berserker fighting tactics.
black improvisational talent with Will Smith. Like,
Yeah,
I always liked how they presented the American president as someone who either would or should be able to lead the battle as like a fighter as well.
Mhm.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, this is the ultimate end of history movie,
Yes.
where we've run out of sort of nativist caricature nation foes to fight. So the next person we have to be chauvinists against are aliens, right?
Yeah, and I remember people saying at the time, like adults being really sort of moved by Bill Pullman's performance and saying things like Bill Pullman should just be the president in every movie.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
people just saying like if that was the president, like we'd win every war and like happily fight for him.
Yeah. I could talk about Independence Day all night. So let's plan to do an episode on that, release it, this July. But I'm going to move on to my pick. I don't know if anyone's seen this, but it's True Stories from 1986, and it's directed by David Byrne of the Talking Heads. I don't know if he directed any other movies, but this is, like I say, not a lot of people have seen it, but it's a delightful little movie. Almost like a I don't want to say Wes Anderson. It's not Wes Anderson. It's, people say anything that's a little offbeat, people say is like Wes Anderson. It's not really, but it's a little bit in that direction. It's offbeat. It's sort of a surreal and affectionate look at Texas, and sort of from the position of an outsider. Like the David Byrne character is coming into town, and he's talking to the people of the town. It has elements of like a mockumentary or something, but it's visually very pleasant, and it's of course got talking heads and David Byrne music throughout. I highly recommend it. I think it's a really fun movie. I haven't watched it in a while, so I'm excited to revisit it.
Weird Texas is kind of an interesting little subgenre there. I hadn't heard of this movie before this talk, but would you put it in the same kind of vibe as like Paris, Texas, or Black
Yeah,
Earth?
I guess so. And also, there was that what's that documentary from Florida where the guy goes and like talks to the people in the town there? I can't remember that one's really famous, but it's kind of like that as well. And also, I guess that Chapo guy got his name from this movie, Virgil, Texas. That's like the fake town where this takes place, which I guess is where he copped his name or something.
It's a loving portrait, though. It's
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I recommend it. You know what? It's a little bit like aesthetically, it's a little bit like what's it? It's Raising Arizona, which came a few years later.
Or if you ever saw David Lynch's Interview Project or any piece of that, where he just goes out and interviews random people, or he had a team do it, and you hear the stories of regular folks.
Yeah. All right, George, you can go now with your next entry, which is the 1978 Superman movie.
So I'm trying to reach these kids, as Cartman said on South Park. So I want to show them something that's a superhero film, but this is a great American movie. And the Superman rights were owned by the Salkins. They were a husband and wife partnership producing duo. And they fought very, very hard to make the most of their Superman IP that they owned. And they tried just about everything. They wanted Paul Newman to play Superman. They wanted Robert Redford to play Superman because they were trying to make the Batman television series Superman television show and have it be a big farce and joke. And Richard Donner, an unlikely director who had done The Omen previously, came in and he decided to treat the material respectfully. And what Superman is at his core is he is a New Dealer quester for justice that was written by two Jewish immigrants who were trying to approximate the ultimate sort of Aryan wasp in American comic books. And so what you get in Superman the movie is a film that I would hope if the kids were to watch it and take it away, it would be you can be the Superman of your own story. Like, the conceit of the Superman the movie, the film, is that Superman is a lowly person who discovers through revelations that he's actually a magnificent alien with superpowers that can free Earth from injustice, right? But there's a wonderful moment in the film where Glenn Ford, who plays Clark Kent's father, dies. And he, with his mother, Martha Kent, they look out upon the Great Plains of Kansas. And we fade out and we move into Superman going into the city. I think any kid or anyone with ambition can sort of, understand this feeling. And Superman the movie is it's got a lot of conviction. And it is not embarrassed of the ideals of the Superman character, which are obviously truth, justice, and the American way. And it's a film that moves from the plains of the Midwest to the great cities of America. And it tells a hopeful story about being true to yourself and being a hero and being loyal to a higher cause. It's really a beautiful film. And there's moments that make me tear up every time I watch it, especially when Superman first arrives and saves Margot Kidder, Lois Lane, from the fate of falling to her death in a helicopter. And it does something that modern superhero films don't do, which that it really focuses on the inspiration of the general public at seeing somebody so fantastic mount heroic feats. And it's a film that is not for cynics. There's plenty to pick apart. But in my eyes, it's a beautiful, perfect American movie.
Kind of an homage to the Midwest too, isn't it, George? Like while it does have that
Absolutely.
transition from Kansas to the city, it's not disparaging of Kansas.
No, it's not at all. And I think it's incredibly salient that in the conception of the story of Superman, you could not have somebody that would save the city or the larger American country if he was not born in the Midwest, which maybe I'm sort of partial to that because that's where I'm from. But I like that idea that there's sort of a simple creed and simple way of life that might teach somebody in America the values and morals that you could carry out to the rest of the country.
Let's jump to Bandy's next entry, The Fountainhead from 1949.
Yeah, well, a lot of us went through an Ayn Rand phase when we were younger. I did definitely, and it's weird to meet 40-year-olds who are big Ayn Rand fans. That's usually problematic in all kinds of ways. But I think it's fun to talk to 19-year-olds who are really into them. It's cool to be really into Ayn Rand when you're 19. That's a good time to be into her. And I think even if you kind of see Ayn Rand maybe the way you would see Superman 1978 as something that you're going to scoff at or it's a little cringe, I think it's bad luck to dissuade a 19-year-old who's really into Ayn Rand, because they might end up building something really cool that you don't have like the energy and the optimism for anymore. And this Gary Cooper as Howard Rourke, the architect, it's one of the most convincing portrayals of an individualist in a film. My favorite scene is a scene where he he's been asked to design this building, and it's kind of a typical design by committee type fiasco where they pervert his design, and he refuses to build it. And this is the last job that he had before he was going to go bankrupt, but he'd rather go bankrupt and go work in a rock quarry than build a compromised design. I think it's one of the best old movies for kids to watch. Gary Cooper as Rourke, and the set design and the music. It's a good flavor of old Hollywood. Um, and I think, even if you're not a 19-year-old, watch this movie, because it'll remind you that there's so many people on Twitter who are like tech bros or really into entrepreneurship, and that's their whole personality. And they can be very cringe and annoying, but they're an important part of our culture. And I think you should work for a startup at some point and learn from them, even if you don't want to be a founder. And yeah, so I think that's part of America. And if you go down this path, we should celebrate it.
Well, Bandy, I think this butts up really well with Superman, because we saw what an Ayn Rand Superman looks like, and it's called Man of Steel. And it doesn't work because that's not the core of Superman, right? But I will say I did think about including the Fountainhead, because that sequence where Patricia Neal goes up the elevator at the end and sees Howard Rourke, Gary Cooper, standing at the very top of his building with his tie flying in the wind, and his, and his hands are on his, he looks like Superman.
Yeah.
And it's very aspirational. Now, I mean, I was the kind of 19-year-old that would be like, bro, you have to read the monologue from the 20th Century Motor Company from Atlas Shrugged. That's going to tell you why communism is bad, bro.
Yeah.
Right? You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm. I know exactly.
And I think that the Ellsworth Toohey monologue in The Fountainhead, by the way, is incredible. I agree with every word. But, why would you say that you have to be 19? And I kind of agree with you, but I just like to hear your opinion on why Ayn Rand doesn't last. And I have a feeling that it's because Ayn Rand took the liberal mode of propaganda and translated right-wing propaganda to it, and it doesn't work.
Well,
what do you think?
I think it's a good philosophy when you don't have children and you don't have to make compromises with a spouse. And she's a militant atheist, and atheism, I think, wilts as soon as you have kids and see how dangerous life can be, and how you can work your ass off and still be unlucky and end up in a bad place. So I think it's I don't know, maybe a bit like a war movie where it appeals most to people who think they're invincible.
Yeah.
Degree study. Let's move on to your next one. Repo Man from 1984. What does this movie tell us about America?
Sure. So I love this movie, but I also think it's just a great movie for American history comprehension. I think of this movie as the InfoWars movie, or maybe even the QAnon movie. It's sort of a movie about the counterculture turning dark and cynical. Emilio Estevez plays this young, like, punk rock kid in LA. He gets fired from his job and dumped by his girlfriend. And so eventually Harry Dean Stanton, who plays Bud, who is a repo man, convinces him to come on board as a repo man. And the car that they're trying to repossess has aliens in the back, or some sort of alien technology in the trunk. And when people open it, they're immediately vaporized. So basically, like, it's sort of a road movie around LA. People keep taking this Chevy Malibu from them, but then getting killed by the aliens in the Chevy Malibu. So they recover the car. But it's a really great movie about, like, paranoid America, about the weirdness of the 80s. And it's like a totally unique tone. I think it's one of those movies where the tone of this movie would come to be extremely influential on subsequent movies, of sort of mixing like sci-fi and deep cynicism and some dark comedy like that sort of became a thing. But this is one of the earliest movies that I'm aware of with that exact tone. And I just wanted to read this one piece of dialogue between Bud. Throughout the movie, Bud is sort of trying to initiate Otto into the philosophy of a repo man and like why it's important to repossess things that people don't pay for. And he says, credit is a sacred trust. It's what our free society is founded on. Do you think they give a damn about their bills in Russia? And Otto says, they don't pay bills in Russia. It's all free. Bud says, all free? Free my ass. What are you, a fucking commie? Otto, no, I ain't no commie. Bud, well, you better not be. I don't want no commies in my car. No Christians either. And it's just like this very odd kind of American guy that it presents. And I don't know, it's a super unique movie. And it's more than some of these older movies we're talking about. I feel confident that like a Zoomer would get a kick out of this movie.
Yes.
I think, because it's so weird.
I love that part too at the very end where Otto has the opportunity to go to the great beyond in the car, and his girlfriend, who's sort of just this like nuisance throughout the film, goes, "Well, what about our relationship?" And he goes, "What? Fuck that!" And he goes, it's just it's a great movie.
Yeah, it's a great like teenage nihilism film as well.
I had a friend who was a repo man for a while. Seems like a job for generating incredible stories. Like he would come home and he just had like the most intense stories about stealing people's cars.
Well, they have that moment in this film too when they steal the car from like the Black family, right?
Yeah, and there's a whole speech like, Emilio asks Harry Dean Stanton all the questions you would ask, like, if someone comes and they're strapped, like, what are you supposed to do? And I remember Bud's character says something like, only an asshole gets killed over a car. But yeah, if you're wondering about I can't speak to the verisimilitude of the movie, but it certainly explores like the funny, situations that come up when you're in that business.
I'm going to jump into my next pick, Hoosiers from 1986. I just think this is a great American nostalgia piece. In the 80s, there was this big 50s nostalgia movement in film. And so this is it's made in 86, set in 1951, about, a basketball team in rural Indiana. And, I think they basically only have like 6 players. They go on to, of course, win the state championship against an inner city team it's much bigger and more talented than them, and has, one of the great scores of all movie history. So it's just a great movie. I just love it, and look forward to doing a full episode on it at some point.
I haven't seen Hoosiers in forever, so I wasn't sure what to weigh in with. But I know, I know the movie's not about Bobby Knight, but I always think of the movie in sort of pairing with the fascinating story of Bobby Knight, who is another, distinctly American character.
Yeah, it's Gene Hackman in a movie that as I understand it, he didn't even really want to do. He wasn't really happy about doing it. He wasn't really happy about being there. He didn't think it would be any good, and he made sure everyone knew that when he was on set. It's got like Dennis Hopper, right?
I didn't realize he was in it.
And Dennis Hopper was such a sort of symbol of like maybe counterculture, or
Sure.
but this is just such a like wholesome America, Indiana countryside movie.
Does he play? Is his character like a deviant of some kind in this movie?
His character is the town drunk,
Okay.
and his son is on the team, and the team part of the narrative of the movie is that he he doesn't fully get rehabbed or whatever, but he gets on a better path as a result of like this new coach who comes to town, kind of helps straighten him out a little bit. The coach like gives him some responsibilities and has him help with the team and all that stuff. Great movie, just a great tribute to to one of although I guess basketball is technically invented in Canada, but a great tribute to one of America's great sports. And
That's fake news. It was invented in Boston.
was it really? I thought it was Canada, but anyway, we can go on to George's next entry, Wild River from 1960. I've never seen this.
So I had a tough time with this one, and I chose it because I felt like the message was salient. So it was directed by Elia Kazan, who I think is best known for On the Waterfront, which is sort of his treatise defending himself for his involvement in the HUAC committees, because he was a former communist, but he chose to name names, and he never lived that down. And for years, he was vilified as one of the worst guys ever in Hollywood. Though I think if you were to watch On the Waterfront, you would see his perspective, which is that he was not willing to bow to the mob. Now, I chose Wild River because it's a movie also about sort of continuing my themes of like the schizophrenia of America. It's about a character, Montgomery Clift, who works for the Tennessee Valley Authority. And he has the unpleasant task of going to a weird little island in the South in a river where there's sort of this haphazard setup of homes, and they have to flood the area to make sure that there will be no more flooding of like main, civilization in, I think, Tennessee. And he's confronted by this older woman who refuses to move. And his goal is to get her to move so they can flood her farm and her old house that stood since the 1800s in order to make way for a more progressive and less waterlogged, Tennessee. And ultimately, the old woman refuses to move, and she ends up dying and being flooded out. And it was a film that I first saw during COVID, and it was a movie that really exemplifies the idea of trade-offs in policy. And I think it also exemplifies the idea of standing your ground and telling the government to go fuck itself, right? Because this woman, who is the holdout on moving, is portrayed as, very principled, as someone who has a very strong worldview, as not a dumb yokel, but someone who is appealing to a past that has value. But yet, our hero, Montgomery Clift, is not vilified as just a bureaucrat. He's willing to work with her, right? But I think if I were to show it to students, I would want them to think pretty hard about the idea of private property and the idea of ownership and of legacy in where you live. So that's why I picked it.
Great summary. Yeah, I've never seen it. I'm very intrigued now. Have any of you seen it other than George?
No, I haven't, and I need to because I'm a big Elia Kazan guy. And actually, On the Waterfront was my dad's favorite movie, and he would talk a little bit about sort of the backstory with that film that George mentioned. So I should definitely check that out.
Yeah, it's a well done film.
All right, Bandy, your next entry, Jeremiah Johnson from 1972.
Yeah. So Jeremiah Johnson, you don't have to think too hard about it. It's just a badass Western about mountain men. And, I think it's a life that many of us would like to lead. It's not possible anymore. Like it wasn't possible in 1850 anymore, really. So there's a tinge of sadness to it, but I think, I think you can live a life that is focused on the outdoors and have a higher degree of self-reliance. You just have to. It's going to look different from Jeremiah Johnson's life, but you shouldn't dismiss that kind of interest as a LARP. And I think it's good to watch movies like this, both to be entertained and to be kind of reminded of that if that's your calling. Um, it was filmed in the Utah and Colorado Canyonlands, I think on some land that Robert Redford had recently purchased himself. So these are kind of some iconic Western landscapes to me, similar to Into the Wild. And I guess like Into the Wild, this is a story about how when you go out in the woods at first, you're a greenhorn and you don't know how to do a lot of stuff, and you want to be more like Jeremiah Johnson than Christopher McCandless. He found a mentor. He had the right equipment. He survived his first winter, and I rewatched it earlier this year because I read a book about the guy it was based on, and it was just I love westerns, but this was just a level above most of them.
I didn't realize the script was John Milius.
I didn't know that
Um,
either, actually.
yeah, but I haven't watched this for a long time. I grew up in Utah, so this one, like this and other Redford stuff, comes up a little bit more often. Yeah, I like your theme though of this sort of. I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to call it checking out. I mean, Chris McCandless was definitely sort of trying to check out of society, but not in a. He seemed very engaged with like people, so I don't know that he was like trying to check out like emotionally or socially, but yeah, I'm really interested in this. And it is sort of a privilege of Americans almost that like you mentioned, like America can be the place for someone who wants to be over socialized and hyper networked,
Mm-hmm.
or America can enable people who want to be anonymous and to wander and disappear.
I'm gonna try to tie all that together with my last pick. But yeah, you're right. You get in the theme.
Let's move on to degree studies next one, unless anyone has anything else they want to say. Degree studies has got The Straight Story from 1999, one of the maybe a lesser known David Lynch movie, but one of my favorites.
Yeah, this is just a beautiful, sweet movie. It's about an old guy who rides a lawnmower across Iowa and Wisconsin to see his ailing brother. Basically, this guy, Alvin Straight, and his brother, Lyle, are both at the end of their life. I think they've both had strokes, but Lyle had a stroke, and they've also been, their relationship has soured over the years, and I don't think the movie ever makes clear why, but they haven't spoken in a long time, and Alvin, in his degraded state, can't drive, doesn't have a lot of money for a plane or a bus or anything like that. So he's gonna ride a lawnmower, and it's actually based on a true story of a guy with the same name, Alvin Straight. And so it sort of becomes in the middle a road movie, a bit of an odyssey. As he's riding his lawnmower, he encounters all these different types of people. There's like a young mother hitchhiking. He meets a fellow veteran, and they sort of connect over their experiences in World War II. And then later, he has a conversation with a Catholic priest. And finally, I think the movie ends with just like a very profound scene. And that, to me, this is such an American thing where the way the reconciliation of the brothers is portrayed is so understated. I don't remember the exact dialogue, but it's something like they're sitting on the porch and Lyle just says, "Did you ride that thing, all the way just to come see me?" And I think Alvin just nods, and then Lyle is sort of like welling up with tears, and that's it. And so, they're American men who are who are not going to belabor the emotional resonance of this, or even, the movie doesn't explore why they even needed to reconcile, but it shows this sort of beautiful resolution to whatever their conflict was. And this next part is just sort of a story about my own lack of media literacy. But this movie was actually necessary for me to get David Lynch, because my brother had shown me Twin Peaks in high school, and I totally didn't get Twin Peaks. I thought it was very contemptuous of Americans. I thought every character was being mocked. I thought small town America was being mocked. And then when I saw The Straight Story, I was like, oh, I have misread Lynch totally. And I need to go back to Twin Peaks and, reassess it based on, I think Lynch's perspective on sort of like small town, small story, like American values and characters. Like it completely recontextualized, David Lynch's work for me. And I guess that was just like a failure of viewing by young me. But it was, I can't think of another situation I've had like that where, watching one film sort of unlocked my perception of a director's other work. But The Straight Story definitely did that for me, and David Lynch. And it's so tonally unique. Like there is a lot of sweetness in David Lynch's stuff, but I think The Straight Story is kind of only sweet, and that's not usually what you get from him. And so if people like Lynch and haven't seen it, I really encourage them to watch it, because on the one hand, it's the director you know and love, but it's totally unique from his other works.
Yeah, the darkest moment in the movie is probably when the lawnmower starts going too fast down a hill, and then like the scary David Lynch music comes in, and it sort of reminds you of some of his other movies. But then that's like quickly resolved. But it's a very Christian movie, and yeah, I think it's great. I really like it. I'm glad you brought it up because as you were saying, like the thing about Twin Peaks and all that. Yeah, I think David Lynch really loves America and Americana, and he puts that on display here. There's also, I don't know if you noticed, but those two brothers he talks to at one point. I think those are Chris Farley's brothers, and so those two brothers are actual brothers, and Farley had died like a year before or something, like a year before they filmed or something, and it kind of felt like the character is talking to the brothers as the Farley brothers, sort of, because he's saying don't let stuff come between you. It's like, don't waste your life being like me. Yeah. And almost I am wondering if it was like, because I knew that their family had some drama and stuff around Chris and all that. Anyway, so that's just an interesting something I
I never knew that or made that connection. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm going to watch this tonight. I've had some false starts with David Lynch. I know I'm supposed to like him, but this looks like it would be right up my alley.
Yeah, it's good. It was distributed by Disney. It's a David Lynch movie with a Disney imprint on it.
Yeah, I think it's PG or G, maybe.
I'm pretty sure it's PG, yeah.
Interesting.
Great soundtrack. Sort of a simple little like theme that just plays over and over. Anyway, I will. My next one is The Right Stuff from 1983. I think
this movie.
Yeah, and our list. We'll get into all of our last four in a moment here, the final four, but we don't have very many space movies on here. I don't know. Is this the only space? I mean, Independence Day kind of counts, but
it's the best one, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the American story, especially if you're trying to sort of sell America to someone, you would think that you'd put space stuff front and center. And I think we only have this one, but and there's many others I could have picked from, but this is an excellent movie based on the Tom Wolfe book, who captured a ton of great details, and you can tell when you're watching the movie that they're going out of their way to include these funny biographical or behavioral details from the guys who did these extremely dangerous test flights, which ultimately sort of led to the space program. But yeah, just the sort of American, the masculine American ideal, risk, but engineering, technology, optimism. It just has it all. It's a sort of a maximalist movie. It's like over 3 hours, and it's just it's great. It's pump you up and sort of show you like how much like sacrifice went into our pursuit of national excellence.
Look at the photos of that era of test flights. The desert out in Edwards Air Force Base, the alkali sand that they often landed on, the dry lakes. The planes were chrome and orange, and the sky was always just this perfect azure. There's the photos. I would love a coffee table book of just them.
Yeah, incredible aesthetics. We can move on to George's number one entry.
Oh boy.
Are you ready?
This is tough.
Yeah. I mean, I might paywall it right here. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you should, because
paywall. You guys want to hear the number ones? I'm going to paywall it.
Endorse that.